Hello everyone, Tensa here. Today I have a video about my favorite deck in the game. This deck is Zefra. When they were first revealed, I was extremely excited to play them, as I'm very enthusiastic about dual terminal lore and everything, although I'm not the greatest expert on the subject, but I've read something. Unfortunately, it was not the cheapest deck in the world, and I played on an extremely tight budget back then, so I did not build the deck until last spring. That was when we got Zefra, Providence and War in Maximum Crisis. It was more pendulum focused than the first variants and a lot more consistent too. But let's move on to the actual content. Why should you play Zefra? I'm going to divide the video in two parts, the aesthetic level and the competitive level. So for the first part, Zefras are extremely flexible, so if you're into deck building, there's a lot of room for innovation and different engines. Last format, the two biggest variants were the hand trap and combo variants, but with Astrograph Limited the combo variant took a significant hit. You can still use Chronograph Sorcerer and the Mythical Beast to summon more monsters on the field easily. If you just play at your locals or with friends, there's much more to explore. You could mix Zefras with pretty much anything, like the archetypes they share with other cards like Tellarknights, Ritual Beasts or the Necros. And if you're a little more competitive, there's still room for innovation. Some people like to play multiple hand traps, others want to use more aggressive engines that allow you to build boards with multiple disruptions. With multiple methods of extra deck summoning, Zefras can adopt new cards in their strategy easily, the latest being FA Dawn Dragster from Flames of Destruction. Unlike many competitive decks, Zefras aren't explored too much as of yet when you compare it to decks like Pendulum Magicians that was tried out a lot and a little more. Also, the deck has varied effects. This right here is definitely more of a personal thing and not everyone will mind, but some people don't like modern decks that pretty much all have the same effects. Think Metal Foes, Ignite or Magispectre. And while Metal Foes in my opinion is a really fun deck, all the monsters pretty much have the same effect, so that might turn someone off. However, Zefras do lots of different things. Although most of them have the same pendulum effect, that's pretty much just a restriction rather than an actual effect, and I wouldn't count it myself. The monster effects range from spot removal to resource management, and there's even easy tuner access. The monster types and attributes also vary, and while this means that you can't really search for all of your cards with single cards like Reinforcement of the Army, you get to add multiple support cards like Emergency Teleport for your Psychics or Rota for your One Warrior, or others if you run like different engines. Lots of different options. As for the competitive value, Zefra might turn out to be the strongest pendulum deck of the May 2018 format, so if pendulums are your thing, definitely try out Zefras. Firstly, the deck is extremely consistent. You have searchers, searchers for searchers, and then you search even more when your cards are destroyed. With Zefra, you can toolbox for any Zefra in your deck, and you basically get to pendulum summon with just Zefra and any other pendulum monster. Even a single pendulum summon of Zefra Neo gives you a counter trap, and when the Zefra Neo is destroyed, you get an additional search. Zefras as a pendulum deck have access to Heavy Metal Foes Electromite too, a card that single-handedly makes pendulums amazing. It also adds to the deck's consistency. While Astrograph Sorcerer is no longer among us, that doesn't really matter. You still have easy access to Electromite with Mythical Beasts, Darkworm and Chronograph, and even without the additional resources you get from Astrograph, you still gain a lot. You get to set up for a bigger pendulum summon and maybe draw into more extenders like Destrudo or Emergency Teleport. Your disruptions are also varied, meaning that your board won't lose to a single Amano Iwato if that card is played this format. One weakness of Magicians was that without Time Pendulum Graph, pretty much all your negations were monsters, so if something stops monsters, your whole board is just outed. So, I myself think Draco is still viable, while a lot weaker than last format, so you might see Amano Iwato. Even without Masterpiece, the deck can still run pretty much the strongest floodgates like Anti-Spell or Skill Drain, and some builds even run the Monarch's Erupt. So, if you know your opponent plays Amano, just take Zefra War to destroy it, and even if they don't have the Amano, War can still destroy Diagram or any field spell against other decks. And if your opponent has anti-trap cards, you still have the monster negations in form of hand traps, Vortex Dragon and Jackal King. And speaking of hand traps, this deck has at least two ways of searching hand traps. The first one is Stardust Charge Warrior with Oracle of Zefra, where Oracle lets you search for any monster and put it on top of your deck, then charge for resolves, letting you draw the monster you just stacked. So you can have Ash or Droll in hand on demand. The second option is just as viable. If you make Chao Feng and it gets destroyed, for example by your Ninepillars, you can add any tuner from your deck to your hand. Now this means you can't get Droll, but you can get Ash, Ogre, even Reaper or Effect Veiler. And in addition to all of these, your main searcher Zefra Providence will protect your Zefra cards from destruction, similar to Return of the Dragon Lords. So you can protect your Zefra Metaltron or your Scales. So your opponent will have a really tough time outing your field. Playing through disruptions is also relatively easy with this deck. The biggest weakness of the deck in my opinion is Drowned Lockbird when you're going first, and you have like 3 search cards left in your hand, and obviously Anti-Spell Fragrance when you go second. And other than those, you don't lose single disruptions too much. Even those cards have counters to them, like Call by Grave or Cyframe Gear Gamma against Droll, and Cosmic Cyclone or some Synchro plays you can do with Destrudo if, for the anti-spell. So yeah. As for other cards, you might think that Pendulums are really hurt by Dimensional Barrier, but this deck can play through Dimensional Barrier relatively easily. If they call Pendulum, just normal summon your Pendulum and then make a Synchro with a Pendulum summoned Hand Trap or Destrudo. And if your opponent has Ash, that doesn't really matter. You have so many search cards, it doesn't hurt if they Ash 1. And Providence protects your Zefra cards from Ogre, but that still means your Electromite can get hurt. But Electromite is kind of expendable, and the deck doesn't lose if your Electromite gets Reapered. Don't get me wrong, Electromite is really good in this deck, but it can play without it, pretty much. With all the consistency cards, you can push through a couple disruptions and still end relatively strong, even getting your own counter traps or monster negates. This might struggle against established Nightmare boards, but you can always side deck Sphere modes and more hand traps. And I don't even think that hinders your own strategy too much, because you can make your plays with like 2 cards, Zefrath and any Pendulum. That already does something. If you have more cards, yeah, that's really good. Anyway, to summarize, the deck is very flexible, allowing for many different variants. And the deck is varied in effects, so if you don't like decks that have carbon copy monsters, this deck has pretty much a lot of variability. And the deck has great competitive value with access to Electromite. You can do Pendulum summons with little resources, and it's not really hard to get multiple disruptions with counter traps, hand traps and monster negates. And even your opponent's boards are somewhat easy to out. All in all, that's all I had in mind, and if you have not tried it yet, I hope you're now interested in the Zefra deck. And anyways, that's it. Have a nice day. Tensei out.